Hey students and teachers, today we're going to talk about contextual factors in education, particularly in K-12 education. And what I mean here when we're talking about contextual factors is what are those things about the school, about the district, about the individual students that are different from other schools, districts, students, that would require us to make adjustments, to make accommodations so that every learner can learn effectively. Let's head on over to our slides here and we'll get started with this. So we are just looking at context. All right, so what's a contextual factor? So when we think about context, we're thinking about what are your motivations for learning, what's your support for learning, and so obviously who you are, where you come from, what your background is matters. What resources and tools you have access to matters. Examples impact your motivation. You know, if you come from a family where of high achievers, that's going to make a difference in your education. So throughout this presentation today, I want you to think about this question I have noted here at the bottom. What are the contextual factors that you think matter most? And we're going to go over a bunch of different factors here in a bunch of different areas, and I want you to consider what matters most, and maybe you'll drop into the comments as things that maybe I'm not considering or giving enough weight to. So first, one of the contextual factors is the location. So thinking about the community that we live in, a rural community is going to be much different from an urban or a suburban community, and things that will be different are what in-school resources are available. So if you're in a poor district versus a wealthier district, you're going to have a different amount of resources. What resources your students have at home would also be there. Extracurricular opportunities. Obviously, in a smaller, more rural environment, you're going to have less opportunities for extracurriculars, but there are also going to be different kinds of extracurriculars, right? So it's the kinds. As far as safety, what kind of resources do the schools have, or in the community, is it a good neighborhood, is it a bad neighborhood? The diversity, religious, racial, gender, etc., attitudes regarding education, and then even current event and traditions. And this is interesting because one of the places where I lived, schools shut down for the beginning of the hunt, right? For the beginning of a particular season. Other schools where I've lived at in other parts of the country celebrated different holidays, right? Depending on the religious, the predominant religion in those areas. So that would affect schools in different ways. And obviously that this affects schools in a major way. What are the values of the community? When we look at our individual students, obviously these things matter. Age, even within a classroom, right? So I love in the book Freakonomics where it talks about how professional hockey players often were born in January or February because that's the cutoff for Little League hockey. Pee Wee hockey is, if you're born in January, then you are the oldest of your grade. So you're going to develop physically first, and you're going to be playing with people who are older than you, so you're going to develop, or younger than you, so you're going to be more dominant, you're going to have more skills, so you're going to make the all-star teams and the travel teams more likely. And so age matters. Even within a classroom, there might be advantages or disadvantages if you're older or younger. Gender and gender identity matters, right? So often kids will get teased or bullied dependent on their attitudes towards these kind of things or their beliefs. And so that makes a difference. Your background culture, your personal interests. I know this firsthand. Maybe I'm viewed as a little weird or socially awkward because of what my interests are and because of my family background and the things that I prioritize. So that makes a difference with how you interact with students in your classroom. The quote here that I have from an article that we read was, teachers should anticipate students' needs based on these attributes. So that's hard to do when you have 20 or 30 students in a classroom, but the more you know about your students, the better prepared you will be to teach them. And we'll talk about that more here in a minute. Other factors related to the school, and this is highly correlated with the location or the community. But what do you have available to you as far as physical space, the layout, equipment, resources that are available? And that's not just equipment, but also aids. Are there reading aids? Are there people for disabilities? Are there instructional coaches at your school? Those things all make a difference. So the way I wanted to get through this today, let's see if I can, I'm trying to drop, there we go, sorry, so you can read it. Anticipating students' needs. I wanted to go through a bunch of case studies that I just drew up, and I thought of what are some common things that we see in our schools. And so I'm going to give you a hypothetical student, and we'll talk about how can a teacher prepare to teach that a student with that particular need. And often these needs are based not just on the students individually, but the culture, the background they come from, the opportunities they've had. All right, so let's start with the seemingly disengaged but thoughtful student. And as examples, I have people on the autism spectrum, introvert, shy students. When I was a student, I identified in this camp, I was deathly afraid of talking to adults. I never raised my hand. It wasn't that I wasn't thinking, but I probably seemed disengaged to my teachers because I never raised my hand. I never made a comment. And so how do we anticipate these students' needs? Well, one of the things that I've loved about online education is I'm finding that students who maybe never participate face-to-face participate a lot in online environments. So maybe one of the things we can do to anticipate students' needs is give them multiple ways of communicating with the teacher, right? So maybe it's not through verbally by making a comment in class, but maybe it's by writing a reflection or submitting a post and having opportunities for people to engage in other ways. Sometimes, and this might be a cultural thing, students aren't comfortable sharing with an adult. And so giving our students opportunities to talk to their classmates through small group work, that can be a real opportunity. For me, always my go-to has been think, pair, share, because as students pair up with each other, they can decide things in small groups, and then there's less pressure if I do call on them to participate in front of the classroom. And I think it's important sometimes we don't need to avoid things as teachers, so we don't want to make our students comfortable at all costs. Sometimes it's really good to help our students be uncomfortable in a supportive way so that they can learn and grow. Let's move on to the next case study. This is the seemingly always distracted and disruptive student. And again, I'm saying seemingly often in these case studies because often what we perceive as teachers is not the reality. It's our perspective on it. So when we have students with ADHD, class clown, extroverts, outgoing students, and again, I relate here because of my ADHD, my attention is all over the place, but I wasn't a class clown, I wasn't an extrovert, I wasn't outgoing. Sometimes I overcompensated, and so I did put on a show because I was so uncomfortable, but that wasn't my natural self. But we all have students like this, and often we don't understand why they're being disruptive. And so here, the most important thing you can do is get to know your students. You know, why are they being disruptive? And often you'll meet their parents and you'll be like, all right, this makes sense, right? Because they come from a home where maybe they're being abused or neglected, and they need attention in their lives, and they need positive attention, maybe from adults, maybe from anyone. And so often our students, any attention is good attention, and so we find ways to reach out to them. My wife, when I first met her, we were talking about this idea of people who were clingy, who needed attention, and there were people in my life who every time I saw them, I was uncomfortable because they'd rush me and hug me and crowd my personal space, and it made me very uncomfortable. And my wife said, sometimes we need to run to them so they don't need to run to us. And what I found is if I would seek these people out and I'd give them a hug and I'd ask them how they were doing, then they were comfortable and they could calm down and give me a little bit of space. And so with our disruptive students, sometimes it's figuring out what's going on in their lives so we can fill that need, or at least try to, or help them find the resources to support them. So If our students are always distracted, let's find out why and see if we can do something about that. I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. Obviously, if we were in class together, we would discuss this and talk about it more, but I just want to bring up a few of these case studies so you can start thinking about it, and if you have some ideas or things to share, drop those in the comments. What about a student with a language barrier? And my students ask me about this. If they're have a language barrier, they're less likely to participate in class. They're going to seem like they're shy, even if they're not shy. And so what do we do for these students? Well, there's a ton of things that we can do for students who have a language barrier. Number one is, let's make an effort to communicate with them, right? And so if that means simplifying our own language, maybe learning some words in their first language, any effort that we make is going to be obvious to our students. And they're more likely to make an effort if they see us making an effort. So try to do that. Try to communicate with them. Sometimes that's using more hand gestures, drawing pictures, but also look at what resources you have. If you have another student in the class that also communicates in that language, pair them up, right? And give them opportunities. If you have resources, texts and other things available in their language, make those available at least on a limited basis so that they can continue to learn and grow. But I think the priority here, and I hope you see this with all the case studies, is we need them to feel safe and secure, and we need to let them know that we have high expectations for them. So if they feel safe, if they feel comfortable in our classroom, they're more likely to take risks. And if they're taking risks, they're going to learn and they're going to grow. And so let's do what we can to help them feel safe and secure. And that might include inviting their parents in, having culture days, doing home visits, finding out what helps them in other cases. I actually had this experience today with a student who said, well, how do you deal with students who have traumatic brain injury? And I had to think, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I've had that situation. But this student could relate because he had a traumatic brain injury. So my first step was asking, what have teachers done for you? What has helped you in your experience? What recommendations do you have for me? And that applies to our ELL students or other students that we've talked about thus far. Let's ask them what has worked best for them, what can we do, and then make an effort to do those kinds of things. All right, what about a student in the midst of crisis? This one's a trickier one because sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. So when we think about a crisis being maybe a physical impairment, maybe they were in a car accident or something and they're coming on crutches, or a sports injury, we're going to see that, right? And so it's going to be obvious and we'll know, all right, we need to make some changes for that. But often if there's a fight in the family or a death in the family, or worse, what if there's abuse or neglect happening in the family, students aren't likely to bring that up because they might be embarrassed by it, right? And so what can we do as teachers to not cross the boundaries, not pry more than we need to, but to understand our students' needs so we can help them, and in some cases get them help, right? And so this starts with, again, having a safe classroom environment, making sure that students feel like they can come to you with questions or concerns, that they can talk to other classmates in the classroom with questions and concerns, making sure that we have that environment. And that comes by getting to know our students, doing getting to know you games, doing surveys, having show and tell or culture nights, things like that. Now, the other thing is having opportunities for students to come to you. So you might have a suggestion box in your classroom where they can either do it anonymously or with their name. Having pullouts from time to time, talking to students in the hallway or out at recess or at lunch. One of my favorite things that I've done with my students is occasionally I'll have an aide come in to handle reading with the whole class, and I'll pull every single student out one at a time to just come talk to me in the hallway, share what are they doing with their goals, how are things going generally in class, how are things going at recess and at lunch, how are things going after school, is there anything that if I knew it as your teacher I could help you? And students will open up in those situations, especially if you've done them multiple times and they see that you care about them. So let's try to anticipate our students' needs by helping them feel comfortable and then giving them opportunities to share. Finally, and we'll wrap with this, is what are other student populations that are vulnerable? What have I not talked about here in the case studies today? When you think about the contextual factors and the individual needs of your students, what are things that have not come up? I'd love for you to drop that in the comment section, especially if you have some suggestions for things that teachers might do in preparation, and hopefully the comment section can be a place where we all go for resources and ideas for how to meet or anticipate our students' needs. So that is it for today. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, I hope you'll like it, subscribe, do all those things, and let me know if you have any questions. All right, bye-bye.